Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
So I'm Jaime Dalton. I am a YA and children's fantasy author, mostly dark fantasy because for some reason my brain likes to twist things a little bit in that direction. I am a fairly new author. I've been in publishing for years, but finally got around to publishing myself and then kind of overcommitted it a little bit with 6 books coming out this year. So I figured what I would do is read a little bit, kind of my intro for Goddess of the Broken, which is currently on Kindle Vella. And basically, Kindle Vella is a reading episode by episode. So as I'm writing it, it's self-editing. I publish it one chapter at a time. And then when it's complete, it'll still be properly edited and published as a full book. So basically, readers get to kind of be part of the journey with me. Anyways, so Tempest knew mortals did 3 things better than the gods. They loved more fiercely, were quick to make decisions, and the food was both adventurous and delicious. Something about the shortened lifespan of mortals drove them to seek perfection in ways that the gods simply overlooked. After 13 days of wandering in the desert with no food or water, that third one seemed to step above the others. She carried nothing other than the blue linen dress draped across her frame and a few gold coins to get her started in her new life. There was no need. Her mortal body didn't require any nourishment and was unable to be harmed easily. The glaring sun beat down on her, and sand blew through her chestnut brown hair as she made her way through the vast desert between Trist and Baroost. She held her hand over her eyes and paused to contemplate which direction she would head. It was the way she had lived for hundreds of years, hiding among the mortals so her gifts couldn't be used by the other gods, moving every 15 years so humans she lived among never discovered that she didn't age as they did. Her ability was helpful in any profession she chose to pursue, and in every city she decided on a new name and occupation. She could feel everything, not just material things, but who people really were. It wasn't that she could read their minds. No, Tempest read their souls and emotions and weighed their righteousness accordingly. That was both her gift and her curse. She couldn't turn it on and off. For the last hour, a soul had been calling out to her among the sand dunes. A truly broken and wronged soul. It fluttered as if it would soon disappear and return to Toth, the land of the dead. She had contemplated ignoring it and continuing on her way. The taste of dandelion shortbread cookies and white tea taunted her taste buds. Something was different about this soul, though. It was almost as if this soul was calling to her specifically, as if it already knew her. This soul wasn't too far out of her way. If she hurried, she could assist the individual and still spend the night in a soft bed. The connection between her and this individual grew stronger with each step she took. The tightness in her chest grew worse the closer she got. Confused and curious, she quickened her pace. While feeling a soul wasn't unusual, her own body reacting to one was. Climbing to the top of yet another sand dune, her feet sliding in the golden grains beneath her feet, she saw a man below, naked, unconscious, and bleeding from multiple wounds. He lay on his side in a haphazard pile of flesh and bones. Tempest slid down to the man and dropped to her knees. She paused before touching him, assessing how severe his wounds were. Noting the burns covering his body, she brushed his long, inky black hair from his face to assess the damage. It was in better shape than the rest of his body, to her surprise. Almost recognizable, if not for the wounds from whoever had left him here. Their connection sent a bolt of searing pain as his body neared its end. Tempest doubled over in agony to his body. Her first instinct to pull herself off to avoid harming him is overridden by a soothing coolness that bleeds from her into him. She lifted herself off of him, but kept one hand tenderly on his side and was surprised to find his wounds were healing. It was unbelievable. She didn't have any healing abilities, at least not in this sense. Her specialty was healing hearts. Never before had she healed someone physically. Who was this man, she wondered. In only moments his body was entirely healed. Looking over his body in awe, she didn't realize that her hand was still touching him until fingers wrapped around her wrist. Her dark eyes darted up and met a golden pair fiercely gazing back at her. "Who are you to touch me?" the man demanded. Too surprised to speak, she only stared back. His grip tightened. "I said, who are you?" Her mind blanked. She sputtered. "Tempest." It wasn't until after she spoke that she realized her mistake. She had given him her real name. Whatever fate had needed from her, she needed to take care of it quickly. Tempest couldn't let word spread of where she was before she moved on, where the other gods would find her, something she swore never to let happen. She ripped her arm away from his grip and scooted away from the man as he sat up. Tempest looked towards the sand dunes as his entire body was now revealed, including details she had carefully made sure to avoid investigating previously. Grabbing onto the bottom of her dress, she tore the bottom third of her skirt off. "What are you doing?" the man growled. "Here," she tossed the torn fabric his way. "Cover yourself. I can't guarantee I can heal you again. I'm sure there's some areas you prefer not to be burned from the sun." He groaned as he stood. "I told you who I am. I think it's fair that you do the same." Tempest tucked a lock of hair behind her ear as a gust of wind blew past them. "It's safe. You don't have to avoid me now." And she turned to look back at him. It almost took her breath away. The sun dropped behind him, creating the effect of a crown of light above him. The man cleared his throat. "Technically, you gave me a name. You never told me who you were." She shook her head in an attempt to snap out of it. "Currently, I'm nobody. I was on my way to Peru for a fresh start when I stumbled on you." She squirmed under his unwavering gaze, questioning why he had this effect on her. She was a goddess, for crying out loud. There was no reason to feel uneasy about him. Deciding enough was enough, Tempest rose to her feet and crossed her arm. "Who exactly are you, and why were you dumped out here in the desert to die?" Silence. "It's your choice to answer or not, but know that I will leave you here unconscious and lost if you refuse. You'll be on your own to find your way back." His eyes widened. "You would do that?" Afraid her bluff would be evident if she spoke, she only nodded her head. "I don't know by whom, but I assume I was attacked and left for dead because of my position in the kingdom." "Are you a noble or someone close to the emperor?" "You could say that." Tempest raised her brow and shifted to one side. That wasn't an answer. "Who are you?" He shifted his feet and squared off an imposing stance. "I'm Aiden Theopolis, ruler of the Bodia Empire." Her heart dropped. This was bad. Very, very bad. The only mortals that the gods ever thought worthy of their time were nobles and royalty. They watched them closely. She needed to run.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. I am super excited to have the amazing Miss Jamie with us. It'll be a fabulous episode, everyone. So let's get going. Hi, sweetie. How are you?
I'm good.
I am so thrilled you're here. Congratulations on the new book. It is
Thank you.
awesome. We're going to jump right in. You're talking YA, you're talking fantasies, all over my bubbles. I want to know, what made you come up with this book? What is the book about? Give us a little more.
So I am a cover designer as well as a author, and I had actually made this pre-made cover that I had titled Goddess of the Broken, I'd say about 6 months ago. And it didn't sell, but I was okay with that because I kept going, I would love to use this, but I just didn't have a story. And then about a month ago, one of my aunts committed suicide and it hit me really, really hard. And suddenly, like the night after she passed away, I just had this huge aha moment where like I couldn't sleep. And this idea literally was just like constantly coming to me of this goddess that was sort of, her ability was to be like an empath times 1,000. And like she helped people who had different mental illnesses or they were broken in one way or another, and that she kind of helps heal them. I kind of like all of this sort of laid out in front of me, and it's been sort of writing me to write it. So my other works have been kind of put on the back burner a little bit while I worked on this, but it's been good because it's been able to help me sort of process my grief and like process everything that happened.
Sweetie, I am so sorry for your loss.
Thank
I'm
you.
also so amazed how you're able to take something so painful and give yourself the strength to deal with it through writing. Let's be honest, this is such an emotional journey, knowing
Oh, yeah.
perfectly well. It is. It is such an emotional journey because you know where you're coming from, where your soul is at. And to give yourself that moment of grace and healing, honey, I applaud you.
Thank you.
How does the writing process been through this book specifically?
It has been interesting because that night I had written down a whole bunch of notes and I sort of had the little blurb come to me. Right now, most days I write down and I sit down and write an episode. And it's just been such an interesting process because one of my goals has always been, because I personally deal with depression and anxiety and that kind of stuff. All of my books, I end up putting sort of teachable ways so that people can connect about mental illness sort of things, but in a fantasy setting, which makes it a little bit easier to process and to be able to relate to, especially because a lot of people do them as, we read books to escape. And so I make sure to not put any of it in a like in your face sort of way. But I feel like a lot of times mental illness is not represented in especially fantasy books very like ever really. If it is, it's not normally done very well. So this has just been kind of interesting because it's sort of just letting it flow naturally and kind of letting these new characters sort of come to me for her to be able to help. It has developed into something I did not expect, but it's been so much fun. I will say I think it's probably the best thing I've written so far, just from what I've gotten. So I'm excited. I have no clue how long it's going to be. I'm just kind of going with the flow for this.
This is definitely pantsing to a whole new degree for
It
everybody who's
really is.
listening. Pantsing's when we ride at the seat of our pants. We have talked about these words between pants
I am
and
not a
plan.
pantser. I am not. I am normally a plotter and like I deal with my characters going off script a little bit, but then they have to get back on. So this has been a totally different kind of journey for me than anything I've ever written.
I was going to ask you that because last time we talked, we had this whole discussion how we're both very plotters and have
Uh-huh.
structures and outlines. And there's no plotting here. This is
Mm-mm.
absolutely you hanging out with this muse and
Yeah.
God help us, take me to somewhere you want us to go.
Yeah.
And you're following this thread of power and healing because you said something really powerful. We don't deal with hard issues because we don't want to separate our readers. Sometimes they're not
Yeah.
prepared for it. But if you can give them those teachable moments in small doses and still not be in your face,
Uh-huh.
that's powerful.
Yeah, it's definitely a big goal of mine. My other book, World Walker, book two, like book one is fairly, because it was my first one coming out, I played it very, very safe. And book two, I've got all my beta reader feedback. And so far, all it's been a unanimous, so much better than book one. But it's been an interesting experience because in the world, there were soldiers that had been trapped in this other kingdom for 500 years and they showed up without any like their families are gone, their land is gone, their homes are gone. They have nothing that they're coming home to. And there's tens of thousands of soldiers returning to this. And so that's been an interesting, delicate thing I've been having to kind of work through is how to put in this fantasy setting, like this PTSD that these soldiers all have to be going through. And what does this kingdom do all of a sudden with basically doubling their population and they're all homeless and soldiers and like grieving. And that has been a very interesting, delicate balance to figure out how to properly put in a fantasy setting so that it doesn't bog down the story in any way. I come from a military family, and so it's been good to be able to talk to them about their experiences with similar type things and kind of putting that in a setting that's going to be a little bit more relatable and easier, I guess, for the general reader to read. But at the same time, it's not so in your face that someone who's not familiar with it is not going to jump out at them, if that makes sense. I like to have things in there in a way that people who are dealing with it can connect with it and feel represented, but people who aren't familiar with it don't feel like it's being thrown in their face.
That is a delicate balance to do
Really delicate.
because you can come across extremely preachy if you're not careful
Yeah.
and really put off readers who are not prepared for it. So it is finding the balance between the action, the adventure, the story,
Uh-huh.
and still have that moral thread in there saying, I need to tell you something without completely putting it in your face still.
It has been an interesting balance to figure out how to do that. I think so far though, like I said, all of my beta readers, all of them, like none of them complained in any way in the way that anyone has been represented. And I think it helps because I have elves and fae and, that kind of stuff in my books. I think it helps that elves in general, we tend to think of as being like very well put together, hoity toity, like they never do anything wrong kind of people. And in my mind, they didn't start that way. They're like the extra wise because they've already learned how to deal with these things. And so that's definitely helped ease the process a bit. Now, this with the goddess of the broken has been a little bit different because she doesn't have that. She's the one who has to fix that, but she herself is a little broken because she's hiding from the other goddess because she got tired of being used by him. So it's going to be an interesting healing process for her, but it's been kind of fun because I don't know if you're very familiar with Eastern fantasy god cultures, but they have this running theme where gods, in order for them to like level up their power or whatever, they normally have to go do a human trial where they don't remember that they're a god and they have to go through all of the trials. And like if they fail to go through all of the trials as a human, then they don't get to level up. The love interest in this is a god who is doing that, but she doesn't know that. So I have all these extra little twists that are being thrown in from that. So it's been an interesting book because it's like, it's in the desert. So it's been a ton of research for that. But then it's a time that has like this Eastern God system has been very interesting and like unique how it's all sort of pieced together.
I love the fact that you pull for so many different elements and you are stepping up into your own writing style because you said it. Book one, we play it safe because God
Yes.
forbid we get lynched because this book is going to attack somebody.
Right?
Every
Yeah.
writer, I don't care who you are, when you starting out, we're terrified. I was like,
Oh, absolutely. Most of the time, your first book is the one that takes you the longest to write. Like World Walker took me like 5 or 6 years to get to that point. And I know there's a lot of authors that spend more than that on their first book, but you can't take that long on each book after that. And it's funny because you tend to overthink book one. And sometimes you end up overworking some of the magic and like I had a editor tell me, they're like writing style is literally just the grammatical errors that you naturally inflect. And they're like, the thing is finding an editor who's able to match your grammar errors and who's willing to leave those in, but still make it so that it's put together enough for a reader to be able to enjoy it and not be hung up by typos and flow issues and that kind of thing. And that like really settled with me a lot when I started working on my other books after that first one. So I was like, that makes sense. Cause I do feel like my first book, some of the magic got worked out of because I had too many editors look at it. I had too much overworking because I was so worried about this isn't to market enough. It's hard not to do that with your first book. And if it doesn't do at least somewhat well, it's hard to be motivated to write another book. So it's hard.
it is finding the balance between the author, the artist, and the business and
Yeah.
trying to get all of these babies together. And you're a cover designer.
Yeah.
So you're adding an extra level of pressure because you know exactly what a book's supposed to look like in order to sell.
My knowledge is like leveled above what my current skill actually is. And it's so frustrating sometimes.
Because you know what it looks like, you know what sell, you know what's competing. My blessing, let's be honest, 5 years ago, I had no idea. Nobody knew what to tell me. I was going blind into this and I was like, I just want to write one book and Lord help me. Let's get this baby done. No clue. So when you're looking at it, it's finding those balances of how do I create this baby and let myself be authentic and
Yeah.
still come up with a good book.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard too because we tend to look at books that are like blowing up on TikTok or that like suddenly, and there are those stories that we hear about, like, oh my goodness. But then we forget that sometimes those books were written years before that trend popped up. I mean, like monster romance is massive right now. And same with sci-fi, steamy romance. But most of the books that blew up when that happened, they were written years before it was a thing. So like the books were not doing nearly as well until all of a sudden that became the to market trope. And it's really hard because especially new authors, a lot of times by the time we see that it's happening and we decide to try and write to market, by the time we're able to publish it, that trend is done. Like it's fading out. People are moving on to the next thing. And so I definitely made a decision early on that like thing I write is going to be for me. And I'm kind of just going to have to look at this almost as like an expensive hobby and throw in like evergreen tropes, the tropes that kind of stick around. Unfortunately, since I write fantasy, there's plenty of those that I could do that with. So that helps. But I feel fortunate that because I spent years working with like helping guide new authors to publish and then also working with best-selling authors, I learned so much. And I feel like I'm a lot more confident with my stuff than most new authors are, just because I've been through that process with so many authors at this point. And doing covers, I got to the point where I was totally fine with being able to go, they're not my target audience. I've only had 1 2-star review, but I've had a couple 3-star reviews that were a little rough. But I was able to look at all of them, learn from them, and go, I clearly was not their target audience on these things they were specifically looking for. And it's hard, but I think it's made it a lot easier on me because I've already had years of authors going, I don't like this about this cover. I don't like this cover. I feel like I'm emotionally several years ahead. I just need to catch up with the number of books that are actually published.
You have a lot more experience at dealing with rejection and dealing with the no factor from a creative side, which is sometimes a lot harder because when you're creating a cover, it's truly your artist involved.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, as an author, hey, I need a cover.
The hardest thing for most authors is that if you have a cover designer, the point of hiring a cover designer is that you're not just hiring an artist, you're hiring a marketing specialist And your cover is the only image that most of your potential readers are ever going to see for your marketing. And like even Amazon, when you run Amazon ads, it's the only image you're allowed to use. The hardest thing that for most authors is if you're working with a cover designer who's really a marketing specialist, they need to know not just the genre, but your target audience. And most authors have not figured that out yet. I would say normally my first couple days working with an author is us figuring out who that target audience is. So I can put in the cover tropes, the fonts, the saturation, the contrast, the movement. And that's normally most authors' hardest thing. But normally they exit with me in a much better place because they're able to then know what categories to add for Amazon and that kind of thing. So normally they're in a lot better place by the time they're done with me.
Listen, it is beautiful. And sometimes, as an author, especially if you're starting out, most people forget all the intricate things that come into creating this world and everything that you got going on. So, yes, I'm super excited. I love the fact that you do covers and that you have this visual piece on it. So, it's absolutely amazing. So, tell us, sweetie, what are you working on?
I have a couple projects in the work right now. I've Goddess of the Broken is kind of my main focus. And like I said, that's on Kindle Vella. The first couple episodes of that are completely free. Then I'm also in the process of editing book 2 for the Banneret series because that goes to my editor in 2 weeks. And like the cover is done. It's pretty much ready to go. And that publishes in September. I have a children's book that is about a little dwarven girl she's afraid to leave under the mountain. And so it's kind of like about her learning how to overcome her own fears and that kind of thing. And that is currently with an illustrator. So that will be publishing soon. And then my last project is for another series that I'm working on. And it releases in the Fated Mates box set, which is on pre-order right now. That specific book is a gender bender Sleeping Beauty world, which has been very, very interesting to work on writing. The entire series is all going to be standalone books that are gender bender, but are all like part of the world until the final book, when suddenly you'll be able to see what order everything happened in. Because there's one reoccurring character through all of the books. She's like the morally gray villain, but who's actually one of the princesses. And it's kind of funny because my beta readers, and I have a short story that's free for anybody right now on my website. It's like the intro to this world. And I have so many readers that have been messaging me trying to guess which princess this woman is. And like, she won't be revealed as to who she is, which princess she is until the final book. But she gets to be sort of like the accidental villain. She's not the big, big baddie, but she gets to be like the accidental villain throughout the whole series. It's been funny watching people try and figure that out. But yeah, I'm working on the Sleeping Beauty, Throne of Slumber. And that one is a kind of been fun because she is a plus size fae, and which is not very common for fae in general. Normally they're very dainty and delicate and all of that. So that as a curvy woman myself, it's been kind of fun sort of exploring how that could affect someone in a fantasy setting. I have it so that her abilities haven't shown up yet. She's got multiple things kind of going against her in her world. I like to kind of add in some of the like mental damage that happens. And that's been an interesting one to play with of how to present this properly, but in a like very entertaining way. So that's been really fun. Oh, and that one's also been kind of fun too, because for the first half of the book, she's disguised as a man. That has been an interesting twist to work into a Sleeping Beauty retelling. This one is kind of interesting because Sleeping Beauty really, the story is actually technically about the 3 fairy godmothers and Maleficent. The princess, they're the ones who get all of the fanfare, but at the same time, like you watch the movie, they each get like 10 lines apiece and that's it. Like they're really almost non-existent. I'm sort of turning that on its head, and I've had fun kind of messing around with the fairy godparents are not traditional in any way. So it has been a very fun twist that I've been working on. That's my like one of my many projects, but that's my last one publishing this year.
Sweetie, you have a lot.
I do.
There are listeners. You need to follow Jamie because she is going to keep you entertained nonstop. And oh my God, this is so much fun. I am so excited to watch everything you're adding to your stories and kind of the essence. You have this amazing way to intertwine the moral view without being oppressive and in your face, which is just say is beautiful to see. I love it. Sweetie, tell me, where can our listeners find you? Where they can find your books, where they can learn more about you and connect with you?
So one of the best places is my website, which is jamiedalton.net. And like I said, I've got a freebie on there, which does not require a newsletter sign up. You're welcome to, because I do send a lot of extra little freebies and that kind of thing to my newsletter. So my website is a good spot. And then my biggest presence would be on TikTok, which is at Magnetra. So think female Magneto from X-Men. And that is kind of probably my biggest presence. I do have stuff on Instagram and Facebook and that kind of thing, but really TikTok is where I spend most of my time because I think it's a lot more fun because I get to engage in a more one-on-one personal kind of way with people on there. So yeah, those are probably the best places.
And you do have awesome, fabulous TikToks for everybody listening. Make sure you follow her. I am officially have become a TikToker, which is a little scary.
Once you hit 1,000 followers, we'll have to do lives. It'll be so much fun.
We could talk about anything for hours. So
right?
your listeners, be prepared. This is about to go down. All right, sweetie, before you leave us, because you know I can keep you forever and we can chit chat about anything. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Sure. Should I be scared?
Easy. Do not think too much about this. Let's see how you do. Early bird or night owl?
Night owl. I stay up till 3 a.m. writing and working on covers every day.
My heart goes out to you. Okay.
I'm so tired.
I'm tired thinking about it. I was like, coffee or tea?
I love both. My liver prefers tea, so we'll say tea.
Health matters are important. Let's do that. Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Okay. Me too. I'm a waffle kind of person. Pirate or knight?
I'm going to say pirate, which is so funny because it's like the total opposite of what I write. I love reading enemies to lovers and like the kind of darker love interest, but I tend to write more of the cinnamon roll type guys. I expect the respect. And so I think I just write that.
That is hysterical. In so many different ways. Like, that's pretty funny. Okay. All right, sweetie. Here's the last one, a little different. If your main character had a theme song, what would it be?
So I'm going to do Tempest because she's fresh on my mind and she's a lot more like me. I would say Funhouse by Pink.
That's a really good one. Ooh, love it. So tell me, sweetie, do you have any closing remarks for us? Anything you want to tell us before you leave us?
Nothing off the top of my head.
Sweetie, it has been an absolute pleasure having you. Congratulations on the book releases
Oh.
and continue to create these fabulous adventures. Let us know when you're ready to come back on the podcast because you know I'd like to have you. And to our listeners, go ahead, follow Miss Jaime, pick up these books, check out Bella. You're going to love it. Go on this amazing adventure. And remember, we'll be back next week with another amazing author. Stay in touch. Give us a review. And a huge thank you for our Patreon community for sponsoring us. Have an amazing day, everyone. Bye.